Hello, and welcome to this recording from our session on mental health and well-being for rural social enterprises. This was held in November 2020 as part of Social Enterprise Network Scotland's Restart and Rebuild Week. In this video, we hear from Emma Straughan, Project Facilitator at SAMH, Scotland's largest mental health charity. Emma's presentation gives an overview of the impact of the pandemic on mental health and well-being and signposts to ways we can support ourselves and others.
I work for SAMH, the Scottish Association for Mental Health. This is the largest charity in Scotland dealing with mental health, and they've been on the go since 1923, so a very, very long time. So I've got a lot to live up to. The project that I run is called Let's Talk. It's a community engagement project that is a pilot project running across Glasgow and Lanarkshire, picked because of the long waiting times for mental health services, because of the high rates of suicide across Scotland, but obviously I'm focusing in Glasgow and Lanarkshire, and because of the number of areas of deprivation across Glasgow and Lanarkshire as well. So the aim of the project is really to try and speak to adults, to raise their awareness about mental health issues, to try and tackle a lot of the stigma and discrimination that's out there, which quite often stops people from seeking help and support, and also signposting to lots of different support services that are out there as well. I'm going to pass on loads of information to the organisations today, so please don't feel bombarded with information, but it's just there to help you should you need it. And everything that I do, I use the 5 ways to well-being, which is something that I've used in my own recovery and self-care, and something that I'll talk about a little bit later on. So just to give you a kind of quick overview of mental health, I think it's important to say that we all have mental health. I think as a society, when we talk about mental health, we tend to sort of think of the negatives around mental health, but as I say, we all have mental health like we all have physical health, and we're all really good at, complaining and moaning and groaning about our aches and pains and our coughs and colds, but we're not so great at being able to talk about, how we're feeling, our moods, our thoughts, and our emotions. And these have a massive impact on how we work, how we study, the choices we make, how we handle life's ups and downs, which I think is particularly relevant just now. So I think it's important to remember that we all have mental health, both good and bad. 1 in 4 people are affected by poor mental health. I would argue that's probably a lot higher, and especially in more recent times. I think, again, stigma and discrimination plays a huge part in stopping people from being open and honest, or as open and honest as perhaps they would like to be about how they're being affected by issues around them and their mental health. And while mental illness doesn't discriminate, it doesn't care whether you're black, white, young, old, rich, poor, where you come from, what you do, there are some vulnerable groups out there who are more susceptible to developing mental health conditions, and also some locations as well. So in particular, areas of deprivation, but also I'm going to touch a little bit on sort of rural areas as well today. So some of the groups of people, I'm not going to go into great detail. I know that I only have 10 minutes, and as you can probably gather, I'm quite enthusiastic about the topic and probably could go on the whole day. But we've got people like, health workers and those in the front line. So a lot of people that are here today, their staff, their volunteers, mentors, anybody that kind of is helping to run the organisations and the work that they do, are suddenly finding themselves in quite unprecedented times, and probably taking on a lot of roles and responsibilities that they weren't particularly prepared for. So again, a lot of people, suffering as a result in a way as well. A lot of children and young people are affected by poor mental health. We know that about 10% of 5 to 16-year-olds are now diagnosed with a mental health problem. We've got parents, both men and women, especially if they are people with new babies. Postnatal depression is something that affects men and women. So again, there's been sort of more noted cases of that. People in employment, again, during these uncertain times, it's a really scary landscape in terms of redundancies, job cuts, income. I don't need to go into a lot of detail about that, I'm sure. But again, the fact that, we're working long hours and with lots of additional responsibilities and new pressures faced upon us as well. Older people, because of the increasing number of sort of physical ailments that they might have, cognitive decline, and other, bereavement, things like that going around as well. We've got Black and ethnic minority groups. So I work just now with a project that helps refugees and asylum seekers, for example, and a lot of the participants there are affected by PTSD. They've seen some awful events, war, famine, relationship breakups, families being separated and such like. So again, mental illness is rife, and that population as a result. We've got people with disabilities, so people coming with mental health problems, physical disabilities, learning problems, all these different things maybe add to that labelling, to that isolation, that loneliness, and again exacerbate sort of mental health problems either that already exist or perhaps bring on as well. People in LGBT communities as well. 2/3 of people from LGBT communities are thought to have mental health problems. Again, probably because the additional stigma and discrimination that they face. You know, things like self-harm, suicide, depression are quite often common. Victims of domestic abuse not only sought out sometimes because they're more vulnerable, because of their mental health problem, because they're not likely or as likely to speak out. And again, you know, the violence and the effect of domestic abuse on them as well. Again, you know, heightening those mental illnesses. People who are homeless often find themselves on the street because of their mental illness, but again, finding yourself without somewhere safe and secure also exacerbates mental health problems too. And people coming from prison backgrounds, you know, things like schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and suicide are much higher in prison populations in comparison to the kind of outside world as well. And I said I would, you know, mention areas of deprivation. You know, I work predominantly in sort of highly populated areas, but there are pockets where there are rural geographics as well. And we know that people coming from areas of deprivation face far more, you know, barriers to, you know, good healthcare. There's far less opportunities out there and far more triggers, you know, things like poor housing, unemployment, poor attainment at school, homelessness, addiction, you know, the list goes on. So again, there's been a lot of triggers there, a lot of additional triggers in areas of deprivation that bring on poorer mental health. And again, I come from a rural area, so I know what it's like to live somewhere that's quite, you know, isolated, you know, large geographical areas with very sparse populations. Isolation and loneliness is quite often, you know, very common. Transport, if it even exists, you know, public transport can be very unreliable. Not getting to your appointments in time can be quite lengthy in terms of journey times and expensive as well. And again, quite often poorer areas, rural areas as well, have that lack of support and opportunities offered to people within. There's also a lack of anonymity as well. You know, I'm coming from villages and small towns, you know, everybody knows everybody, which is great in some senses, but if you're trying to keep your privacy, that's not always possible. So again, getting that help and support, although it might be on your doorstep, perhaps you know, you're intimidated or put off by the fact that, you know, somebody's going to see you, somebody might know you, and again, you lose your privacy in terms of, you know, your recovery and self-care as well. I know that in recent times we've had a whole load of additional triggers brought on by the pandemic. Again, I'll not go into massive amount of details, but I think it's important to know a couple. But it's also important to know it's not so much what the trigger is, but it's about the fact that you know, what affects one person might not affect somebody else. So, for example, what might be water off a duck's back to you might be the straw that broke the camel's back to me. So it's not so much the trigger, but how it affects somebody. It's great to be able to identify them, but just like the person being so unique, so too are the triggers that perhaps are the causes of poor mental health. The pandemic in particular, I think, has brought out a couple of key themes and key triggers. So loneliness and isolation, you know, a lot of people, as services were cut or were told to shield and went into lockdown, we suddenly found ourselves on our own. You know, I've been on my own now for 7 months, and as much as I love my own company, you know, I'm not designed to spend 7 months by myself. You know, I miss friends and family and those interactions, and again, that can really, you know, have an impact on how you feel. That's been exacerbated by digital exclusion. We're all very lucky here today. We've all got smartphones and tablets and laptops and Wi-Fi that allow us, along with the technical know-how, to be able to get online and access services and support. But Age Scotland, for example, pointed out that 70% of over 70s don't have access to the internet. So instantly, that's an age group, you know, a number of people that aren't able to access some of the support that they need and that they want as well. This then causes a lot more health inequalities. A lot of people were saying, you know, we're all in the same boat. Well, actually, we're not. We might all be in the same storm, but we're very much in different boats. Some of us are lucky enough to be in cruise liners and battleships. Others are in rafts and dinghies, clinging on for dear life. And if you're in an area of deprivation, that's much, much higher. The risk to poorer mental health is much higher as a result of those health inequalities as well. And we know from previous pandemics, things like SARS, there were a number of long-term mental health problems, things like PTSD, especially for those working on the front line, OCD, depression, anxiety. There's so many fears and uncertainties as a result of the pandemic. We don't know, how long these impacts might be and when they might surface as well. So for some people, it's been quite instant. A lot of people, for example, as well, who would have considered themselves quite mentally well before the pandemic, suddenly finding themselves in mental distress, suffering from stress, maybe self-harming, even thinking about suicide, because they just don't know where else to turn to in such unprecedented times. But I want to make sure that everybody knows that there is hope and there is support out there. I mentioned at the start that I use something called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. So the 5 Ways to Wellbeing is a social prescribing model that was developed by the New Economics Foundation. They are the same people that devised the idea of having 5 a day, because we know that Scotland's diet is pretty poor and we need to improve it. So by being active, by connecting, by taking notice, by learning and giving, these are all ways that people can help and improve their mental well-being, and it's a huge component of the signposting that I have for support that's out there. I've used this in my own recovery, didn't realise at the time that it existed and this is what I was doing, but this was something that was complementary to the medication and the clinical interventions that are out there. Sometimes it's an alternative as well, because medication and clinical interventions aren't ideal for everybody. Everybody's so unique that what works for you might not work for me, or might not work for me at that present moment in time, and it might be something that I use further down the line. So being active, I know that there was a couple of people today talking about walking groups, for example. There's proven links between good physical and mental health. Being active helps to reduce stress, depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. It also increases our self-esteem, our self-control, our mood, our alertness, and our ability to meet a challenge. The average adult, if they're fit and well, should be doing about 150 minutes a week of exercise. That might sound a lot, might sound not very much, but it's so easy to do, and it's not just about being in the gym. I personally would never be seen in a gym. It's not for me. I swim, that's about my limit, but walking, dancing, running, cycling, gardening, there's lots of different ways that you can be active. In terms of taking notice, I think the arts and mindfulness, music were particularly useful during lockdown and continue to do so. Because they really help to ground people. A lot of people with mental illness, like myself, spend a lot of time ruminating in the past, thinking I shoulda, woulda, coulda done that better. And the important thing to remember is that it's happened, it's been and gone. We need to learn from it, but not to dwell on it too much. And if I'm not ruminating, I'm catastrophizing. So I'm thinking about the future and worst case scenarios. So by helping to do these arts and crafts and music and mindfulness, it's a great way to kind of broaden your awareness, put your kind of sort of priorities into check, get a better perspective on things, and it also helps you make more positive life choices as well. In terms of giving, volunteering was my means to give back, but there's lots of other ways that you can do that. You can donate, you can sponsor, you can pay somebody a compliment, you can do somebody a favour. It's just thinking about being a little bit more outside the box. It improves your feelings of self-worth, it helps to give you a sense of purpose, and quite often you'll build relationships and trust with people as well. In terms of learning, it's about giving us more hope, our confidence, our self-esteem, our satisfaction, and boosting our optimism and enjoyment. If you're able to do an open university degree, that's fantastic, but it could just be learning a new skill, a new language, a new hobby. It's a way to build connections and resilience, your ability to bounce back from something. Gives you a sense of activity and purpose, maybe gives you some sort of routine during your week, which is really important, I think, in mental health recovery, and ultimately helps to reduce things like depression and stress, and especially in kind of older people as well. And then last but not least, I think, for me anyway, one of the most important is being connected. Finding a way to connect with people, even if it's not face to face, sending a letter, sending a postcard, sending jokes, memes, gifs, anything that kind of just, as I say, helps to build that bond, rapport and trust between people. You know, a problem shared is a problem halved. So if you're able to speak to people, it really does help to give you a sense of security, belonging, and purpose. And it really does help to buffer against mental ill health as well. For me, my connection is a peer support group that I help to now run. I joined initially just as a participant, but I've got so much out of it that I help to run the group now, and that is really my sort of best way of connecting with people, because I get that respect. I don't get the judgment, I don't get criticism as well. And I think peer support goes a long way in helping to tackle mental ill health.